President Trump wants to usher in a new golden age for the United States. The better path is to partner with Canada, not to punish us.
I'm speaking with Prime Minister Trudeau tomorrow morning, and I'm also speaking with Mexico tomorrow morning. And I don't expect anything very dramatic. We put tariffs on. They owe us a lot of money.
We have already a lot of refineries in Canada. We could always look to build more, but that is really something that will come forward from industry if there's a business case from it. If it's a question of the federal government funding a new refinery to 100%, because there's no business case for it, I think Canadians would quite rightly ask, well, if there's no business case for it, why are we doing it?
Canada and the US have long been bound by energy trade, but Trump's latest move may have just blown that relationship apart in a way no one saw coming. In a shocking move, Canada has just turned its back on US oil and set its sights on European gas, all thanks to Trump's latest tariffs. Could this be the beginning of an energy trade war? And what does it mean for the future of North American energy dominance? Join us today as we break it all down. But before diving in, like this video and subscribe for more insights on the latest geopolitical updates. Pump prices set to rise as Trump tariffs hit Canada.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary, because tariffs are going to make us rich as hell. It's going to bring our country's businesses back that left us.
The fate of Canada's oil industry hangs in the balance, entangled in a web of political strife, financial uncertainty, and relentless activist opposition. Any attempt to construct new pipelines would demand the Canadian government's decisive intervention, battling through regulatory roadblocks and economic constraints to ensure success, industry experts warn. As US President Donald Trump threatens tariffs on Canadian oil exports, a sense of urgency grips the nation. Politicians from various factions call for new pipelines stretching to Canada's coastal terminals, desperate to break free from an overwhelming dependence on the US market. Oil, the lifeblood of Canada's economy, fuels its status as the world's fourth largest oil exporter. An astonishing 4 million barrels per day flow south to American refineries, nearly 90% of Canada's total oil exports.
Mexico, America's biggest trading partners, will now be taxed at 25% or 10% for Canadian energy products. Trump is also adding new tariffs on imports from China, bringing them up to 20%.
Faced with this precarious reliance, Canada's Liberal Energy Minister, the Conservative opposition leader, and multiple provincial premiers have sounded the alarm. Diversification is no longer a choice, but a necessity. Calls grow louder for ambitious pipeline projects to carve new paths to the west, east, and north coasts. Yet, despite this political rallying cry, no private enterprise has dared to shoulder the weight of such a colossal, multi-billion-dollar endeavor, one that could take a decade to realize. The scars of past failures linger. In just a decade, 2 monumental east-west projects were scrapped, and in 2021, a Canadian company suffered catastrophic losses when then U.S. President Joe Biden revoked permits for the Keystone XL pipeline. Now, Trump has reignited the debate, vowing swift regulatory approvals for the project's resurrection. Yet, in the same breath, he has confirmed that tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports will take effect in March, threatening to undercut the very foundation of Canada's oil trade.
Yeah, once those tariffs kick in at midnight tonight, you can expect those gas prices will spike in the coming days. Now, gas prices have been trending down in 2025, but with the tariffs on oil and gas imports, you're going to be shelling out more every time you fill up.
So today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia.
For Canadian oil producers, the stakes have never been higher. Tariffs would drive up costs for U.S. refiners or slash profit margins for Canadian suppliers, crippling the demand for a new pipeline before it even begins. But even in the absence of tariffs, the road ahead is treacherous. The scars of past losses loom large, and for many in the industry, the risks remain simply too great. Dennis McConaughey, a former TransCanada Corporation executive who once championed the ill-fated Keystone XL project, puts it bluntly, building pipelines in Canada has become an almost impossible gamble. If I were on the board of a pipeline company, I would find these risks very difficult to rationalize taking on, McConaughey said in an interview. Canada's last remaining lifeline to bypass U.S. dependence is the Trans Mountain Pipeline System, a vital artery stretching from Alberta's oil-rich heartland to the British Columbia coast, where crude can then set sail for overseas markets. But even this project, hard-won and fiercely contested, stands as a stark testament to the brutal realities of building pipelines in Canada. The long-delayed expansion of Trans Mountain, finally completed last year, nearly met its demise when Kinder Morgan threatened to walk away in the face of relentless environmental and Indigenous opposition. In a dramatic turn, Ottawa stepped in, purchasing the pipeline for 4.5 billion Canadian dollars, $3.15 billion US dollars, in 2018 to push the expansion through. Yet, what began as a calculated rescue quickly spiraled into a financial quagmire. Construction delays and soaring costs inflating the project's final price tag to an eye-watering 34 billion Canadian dollars. This level of cost overrun sends a resounding warning to the private sector, cautioned Kent Fellows, an energy economist at the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy. And the message is clear: the risks of building new pipelines in Canada have never been greater.
Take a look at this, the Dow Jones. Oof, and specifically notice when it starts getting red, right around 1:30 or so. Yeah, in the last hour, Wall Street investors appear to be rattled.
For years, Canada's energy industry has decried the endless bureaucratic red tape and regulatory uncertainty that have crippled projects and sent investors fleeing. The key obstacle? The 2019 Impact Assessment Act, which imposed sweeping social and cultural evaluations on top of environmental reviews. Since its enactment, only one project, the Cedar LNG venture, has managed to navigate the labyrinthine process, and even that took a grueling 3.5 years. Martha Hall Findlay, a former Liberal MP and ex-Suncor Energy executive, argues that without urgent amendments to this act, the private sector will not even entertain the thought of a new pipeline. Real collaboration with the provinces is crucial, she said, but it will demand bold political leadership. The skepticism runs deep. Enbridge CEO Greg Ebel made it clear his company will not pursue another Canadian pipeline unless Ottawa undergoes a seismic policy shift. He insists that major reforms are needed: faster permitting, the elimination of proposed emissions caps, and stronger loan guarantee programs to empower Indigenous communities as equity investors in pipeline projects. Legislative action must explicitly declare major infrastructure projects as being in the national interest, Ebel asserted.
Imports from Canada and Mexico. He also set tariffs of 10% on Chinese goods. The measures are due to come into force on Tuesday. The announcement has provoked immediate reactions from the countries concerned.
Yet, even if the regulatory landscape were to change, one pressing question remains. Would Canada's oil sands industry even be capable of producing enough crude to justify another pipeline? It took years of steady expansion to fill the newly completed Trans Mountain Pipeline, with Canadian oil sands output surging by 1.3 million barrels per day over the past decade. Analysts at S&P Global Commodity Insights project an additional 500,000 barrels per day increase by 2030. But in an era of deep uncertainty, where policy, environmental pushback, and global energy shifts cast long shadows, will Canada muster the resolve to break free from its dependence on the U.S., or will the dream of an independent oil future remain just that, a dream? How much oil does Canada send to the U.S.?
But we will respond like they've never seen before. You need our uranium, you need our potash, you need our high-grade nickel. I will stockpile our high-grade nickel at 50% of your military and manufacturing needs. Your aluminum, the steel, the lumber. It will be an absolute disaster.
Canada's dependence on the U.S. as an oil export market is nearly absolute. In 2023, a staggering 97% of its crude oil exports flowed south. According to the Canada Energy Regulator, CER, the reliance is mutual. Canada supplied 60% of U.S. oil imports that same year, per the U.S. Energy Information Administration. By 2024, Canadian oil production had surged to 5.7 million barrels per day, with 4.3 million barrels of petroleum products still making their way to the U.S. daily. Could Canada cut off its oil supply to the U.S.? Theoretically, yes. But in reality, such a move is highly improbable. While the federal government holds the authority to halt exports, the situation is far from straightforward. Canada is a confederation, meaning power is shared between the federal government and the provinces, said De Silva. With oil production falling under provincial jurisdiction, any attempt to sever the flow of crude would be tangled in political and legal complexities. There are definitely legal questions there, because Canada's never done it before, De Silva told Al Jazeera, adding that disagreements could cause a domestic constitutional crisis. De Silva added that there is also the question of where the oil would be stored after turning off the tap. When pipelines are full, it will be very hard to find space for an additional 4 million barrels a day.
Americans could soon feel the squeeze on their wallets big time. Prices of food, electronics, and big-ticket items like cars all potentially going up and up.
If Canada were to sever its oil supply to the U.S., the consequences would be far-reaching, not only for American refiners, but also for Canada's own eastern provinces, Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick. There would be a question mark over how the eastern parts of Canada would get their oil, warned De Silva. Given that Canadian crude reaches these provinces via pipelines passing through U.S. territory, such a move could provoke retaliation, potentially blocking the flow of oil back into Canada. The 1977 U.S.-Canada Transit Pipelines Agreement was designed to prevent such disruptions, prohibiting either country from interfering with the transmission of hydrocarbons in transit. Yet, De Silva remains skeptical about its enforcement under a Trump administration. I don't know if they are that focused on those international treaties, she said. Trump's own words add to the uncertainty. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos last month, he dismissed Canada's energy leverage outright. "We don't need their oil and gas. We have more than anybody," he declared, vowing to ramp up domestic drilling to offset any potential loss of Canadian imports. While alternative transportation methods, rail, truck, marine, and tanker, could theoretically bridge the gap, they come with significant downsides. Pipelines are the safest way to transport oil and gas, De Silva emphasized. They are also the most efficient and most cost-effective, so it would not be a complete solution. It would not be an ideal solution, but it would be an option if needed.
We're ready. We are ready with $155 billion worth of tariffs, and we're ready with the first tranche of tariffs, which is $30 billion, which is already known.
The scale of Canada's reliance on pipelines is undeniable. In 2024, pipelines carried 89.6% of all crude oil exports, with only a small fraction transported by rail or other means, according to CER data. Faced with these risks, Canada has been actively seeking alternative export markets. However, as De Silva pointed out, there is no quick fix. Even under Biden's presidency, the need for Canada to rethink its pipeline strategy was clear. His administration made that stance known on day one when he canceled the Keystone XL pipeline over climate concerns, closing the door on a major export route to the U.S. It is time for Canada to review its strategy, because we see that now, with the new administration, it can become very dangerous for us only to have one client for our exports, economist Miguel Willett wrote in a report published in 2021 by the Montreal Economic Institute, MEI. Canadian pipeline operator Trans Mountain said that if Trump does implement tariffs, deliveries to Asia are likely to increase, Reuters reported on Tuesday. A pipeline was expanded last year to bring oil to Canada's Pacific coast, from where oil is shipped on tankers to China, Japan, and South Korea. De Silva explained that banning oil exports to the U.S. would also have a very negative impact on Canada's own economy. The oil sector is the largest driver of our economy, she said. Given that the U.S. is our largest export market, I think the federal government would think very, very carefully before choosing to do that because the domestic impacts would be almost as considerable or as considerable as the impacts on the U.S. Trump agrees to pause tariffs on Canada, but not on China.
Previously, back in 2018, these latest tariffs are now an additional 10 or 15% depending on the product, among the items on the list.
President Donald Trump has temporarily pulled North America back from the edge of a trade war, agreeing to delay imposing 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico for 30 days. The last-minute reprieve followed urgent calls with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who pledged to tighten border security with the U.S. to curb migration and the flow of fentanyl. Trump had already struck a separate deal with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, who agreed to deploy troops along Mexico's northern border. In exchange, the U.S. promised to restrict the flow of firearms into Mexico. Meanwhile, tensions with China escalated. As of 0001 EST, 0500 GMT, Tuesday, the U.S. imposed a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, prompting swift retaliation from Beijing. China responded with tariffs on a range of American goods, including a 15% tax on coal and liquefied natural gas, and a 10% levy on crude oil and agricultural machinery. Trump, calling the 10% tariff an opening salvo, warned that the measures could escalate if no agreement is reached. The breakthrough with Canada and Mexico came just in time, as both nations had been preparing to retaliate against U.S. tariffs. Following 2 phone calls on Monday, Trump and Trudeau announced on social media that they had secured a temporary agreement to bolster border controls, buying at least 30 days of tariff-free trade. Both leaders framed the deal as a victory, but the fragile truce leaves a looming question. What happens when the deadline expires? As president, it is my responsibility to ensure the safety of all Americans, and I am doing just that. I am very pleased with this initial outcome, Trump wrote on his social media site, Truth Social. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced Canada's implementation of a $1.3 billion, £1 billion border security plan, deploying nearly 10,000 frontline workers and bolstering resources to combat the flow of fentanyl, a synthetic drug 50 times more potent than heroin and a top concern for President Trump.
When Apple now is going to start building all of their plants here, all because of what we've done in terms of, it's not because he likes me or they like me. They don't probably like me at all. I don't know. I think he likes me a little bit at least.
Mexico's president took to X to voice her country's concerns. She said that Mexico was not looking for confrontation, but added that her country was forced to impose its own tariffs.
As part of the crackdown, Trudeau revealed plans to appoint a fentanyl czar and launch a joint U.S.-Canada strike force targeting crime, fentanyl trafficking, and money laundering. Many of these measures had already been outlined in Canada's December border strategy, which includes intensified coordination with U.S. law enforcement, expanded intelligence sharing, restricted border traffic, and aerial surveillance using drones and Black Hawk helicopters. The announcement came just hours after Trump struck a separate deal with Mexico, postponing tariffs in exchange for President Claudia Sheinbaum's commitment to deploy 10,000 National Guard troops to Mexico's northern border. Sheinbaum took to X to declare her discussion with Trump as one held with great respect for our relationship and sovereignty. Trump, in turn, described their exchange as very friendly. This latest maneuver echoes a precedent set in 2019 when Mexico, under pressure from Trump's first administration, stationed 15,000 soldiers at its northern frontier to avoid tariffs. Trump has consistently championed tariffs as a strategic weapon, one that, in his view, strengthens the U.S. economy, shields domestic jobs, and boosts tax revenues. Tariffs for us, nobody can compete with us because we're the pot of gold, he said on Monday afternoon. But if we don't keep winning and keep doing well, we won't be the pot of gold. The warning signs are clear. Escalating tariffs could send prices soaring on everything from cars to groceries, with some items already vanishing from shelves. Outrow Canada has made its move, turning away from U.S. oil and embracing European gas. But is this a smart long-term strategy, or will it backfire? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe.